Well, I think we'll go ahead and get started here. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Matt Sweeney. I am an agronomist here with Yara/AdaptN, certified crop advisor, and work a lot with account management and customer support throughout the calendar year at different times. Also joining us today and speaking as well will be Christian Overholzer. Christian's an agronomist with the organization as well, and helps me with a lot of the account management, customer support here in Iowa. Greg Laveau is on the call as well. Many of you know Greg. Greg will probably mostly be remaining silent. He'll probably answer the questions that come in. You guys should be able to see a Q&A portion, a little icon on your Zoom bar at the bottom of your screen, I'm guessing. That is where if any questions, comments, anything like that, you can enter there, and Greg or Christian will answer you as we go through the presentation. Greg might chime in if something technical comes in, or something like that would need to go a different direction with the discussions based on a question that comes in. So, but mostly you'll hear from Christian and I today. So I see a lot of familiar names, but I see some new names here as well. So I want to start with some of the foundational information, some of the background, the history, what we do, how we do it. Go through a dozen or so slides here fairly quickly. And then for those of you that have been with us for a while, we're going to jump right into the AdaptN tool and do pretty much a full demo, focusing on a lot of the new features, a lot of the important components, and going through a lot of the other older features and processes as well. So in getting a start on our discussion this morning, it's really important for our users, our agronomist users, to understand the history behind this tool, because it's one of the things that really sets AdaptN apart in the business, in the industry. So AdaptN really started back in the 70s at Cornell University out east. They were doing a lot of very intense research on time and spatial response to nitrogen as it relates to corn. They created an initial software model that was on their website, and worked with small plot research and strip trials to build a database of information that helped calibrate and continue to test the model. Starting in the 70s and ultimately continues today. In 2013 is when the Agronomic Technology Corp team became involved, and they established, the leadership at ATC established a commercial partnership with Cornell that allowed the rebuilding of the interface, made everything cloud-based at that point, and did a full commercial rollout to retailers and certified crop advisors with the two main products that some of you know today, AdaptN and Insight. This allowed the expansion of research, a lot more on-farm type strip trials to help validate the results that Cornell had originally been seeing throughout the number of years. Currently, as of November of 2017, the ATC team and product portfolio was purchased by Yara International to help form their globally focused digital farming portfolio. Shortly after that, we were announced the winners of the Two-Lane Challenge. This was a very intense, very competitive challenge where we beat 77 global entries. Not going to go into a lot of detail about that, but it would be well worth your time looking into what Tulane University is up to as it relates to water quality the hypoxia zone, and the information they gathered on Adaptan at that time during that process. And obviously, as most of you know, we continue to be committed to providing unbiased information to our customers, and we take a very scientific approach in doing so. So the reason that we're here, the reason that I hope that most of you are here, is helping your grower customers work through the nitrogen management challenge. Obviously, there's a lot of different sources of nitrogen, many ways that nitrogen can be lost. It's a very complex and very dynamic system that we're dealing with. Obviously, most of you all probably know it's highly influenced by the production environment, Mother Nature, the soils that the farmers are planting and growing their crops in, and also the style that they manage. The way we bring all this together is through data and through our computer models. The way we make it easier for the agronomist and taking an educational approach is through the integrations that we have, the ways that we can bring the data that you all as agronomists have, and also the data that the growers may house on their own as well, bringing that into our system, running it on our 13 interrelated models, and ultimately at the end of the day providing a nitrogen recommendation each and every day. Kind of the way we start the conversation is through N-Insight. For those of you that aren't familiar with N-Insight, it's a very easy to use tool that will allow you to have a conversation with a grower about what their program is and how it's performed in the past. So the first step would be, just like many other tools in the precision ag world in this day and age, we start with a field boundary. Lots of different ways that boundary can come into our system. Choose the one that best fits your scenario and the availability of data that you have. And then we're going to ask for some basic generic data about the particular field. So average historical yield, what that grower would be doing for tillage, crop rotation, the average organic matter, and then just a general timing of when are they putting out their nitrogen. Is it fall applied? Is it spring applied? Is it with the planter as starter, or is it in-season nitrogen? What we're going to do is we're going to run the models on this information and provide a report, as you can see here on this slide, that will essentially show the 5-year history of what has occurred over these acres through the 5 years worth of weather patterns. So starting at the top here on the right in the boxes, we're quantifying nitrogen loss from all sources. So from commercially applied nitrogen, as well as soil available nitrogen as well. We're taking all losses from a particular field. We talked about the timing of the nitrogen applications. The user has the ability to run as many scenarios as they want. So for example, you could run a fall only scenario. You could run a pre-plant only scenario, and you could also run a scenario similar to what I have here, where it's a split applied type scenario. Below that, you can enroll the field in Adaptan. You can export this information as a PDF and email it to your agronomist out in the field. You can send it to the grower, print it out, give it to the grower. Whatever you feel is the best way to get that information out into the field. Then below in the graph, you can see we're splitting the field up into the main 2 or 3 different soil textures that field has, and then by growing season, by soil texture, we're breaking it down and determining whether we Adaptan and associated models, whether the end of season nitrogen status was a deficiency in that soil texture, or whether there was actually a nitrogen surplus. And as you can see from year to year, from soil texture to soil texture, you can see differences in whether there was a deficiency or whether there was a nitrogen surplus. And so you can start to engage the grower in the conversation of variable rate nitrogen. You can start to help them understand that there is spatial variability that's occurring out there. The one thing that we've heard a lot of feedback on is that the same nitrogen rate each year is less than optimal. So you can see start to pick out the really dry years or the really wet years where that the standard nitrogen is not going to be the most optimal for profitability. Most of our customers are helping their growers understand that most of their fields do have some spatial variability, and not that any of our tools would recommend significantly more or significantly less nitrogen in any particular growing season, but in a lot of cases, very broad changes in nitrogen management can produce big results. So it's more about the way that the nitrogen is distributed across those acres necessarily than an increase or a decrease in that overall nitrogen rate as a whole. Our customers that are providing feedback to us on and insight are engaging growers in a real conversation. They're sitting down at the kitchen table or in the shop or even in the tractor cab or the combine cab and talking about nitrogen. They're using the growers' farms and practices and obviously that localized weather to help them understand and educate them and help them make decisions. They're using the management scenarios to compare, a program that the grower is already using to maybe a program that you as an agronomist feel is less risky, has less risk associated with those particular practices or activities. Understanding the weather is a very big component of obviously nitrogen and how it's either retained in that soil profile and available to the plant or becomes lost. And then just a general statement of helping to get growers in different areas on board with more of an engaging concept of progressive nitrogen management, helping them associate the risk, monitor the weather, all the things essentially that we've been discussing already this morning. Where we dig a little deeper and get into the meat and potatoes, if you will, of the data that's behind a nitrogen program is within the AdaptIn tool itself. AdaptIn is a very highly scalable computer nitrogen solution. We have agronomists, consultants, researchers, retailers, CCAs. It really has the ability to just generally impact this general space very positively right now with all the different things that are going on with water quality and the hypoxia zone and all the conversations that are going on. This is a tool that can help your growers understand, how they're performing, what they're doing, the risk associated with their activities and their management decisions. So it's important to understand that we're not just dealing with nitrogen, essentially the 4 R's, the second pillar here. Very important components go into what we produce as a nitrogen recommendation. So obviously you can see that and probably understand that weather is a very important pillar in the decisions that we make as well. Other modeling components like the cropping information, the growing degree days, the rooting depth, whether they have cover crops, the hybrid relative maturities, anything that's associated with that crop that we can integrate into our decisions and in our configurations makes a better analysis on our end and ultimately a better recommendation coming out the backside. The soils, so the specific soil textures, that exist within a particular field boundary, helping us understand, mineralization and water holding capacity and nutrient movement. And we're modeling this in 2-inch increments throughout that soil profile. Obviously, the activities that are occurring on that particular field, such as the tillage, any subfield variability, any variable rate applications, and then any associated components of water, whether that be irrigation or fertigation, helping understand the saturation levels and the way that the water is moving through a particular field. So as you can see, the different pieces of the models that we have working together is very, very complex. So before we jump into the tool, I sometimes skip past this, so I wanted to include this up front. But essentially, we have 3 ways that we can create, that our users, our agronomist users, can create nitrogen recommendations for their growers. The first of those is on the left here, we call point-based. And this is just a real fast and easy way to get a whole field recommendation. There's no variable rate component to this. There's nothing to export, just a visual way to evaluate, just like I said, a flat rate recommendation. Where we get into the variable rate component is when we configure fields by polygon zones, or we set them up to be what we call grid-based in 60-foot by 60-foot grid cells. This is where we go into a very in-depth configuration process, giving the user the ability to bring in spatial data, to configure different areas, specifically as it relates to how that field is being managed by that grower. I think now I'm going to pass it over to Christian, and we're going to start going through the tool, unless there was any questions that come in during that first little bit there.
Nope, good to go.
Now within the settings, the first thing that you'll have to do before you begin doing anything with an Adapt-In is bring in a grower, and that's within the user and grower list here. So within this, if you're an agronomist, you can only add a grower account, but billing admins can add both agronomist and grower accounts. So you can click the Add Grower Account button, and it'll just have some information for the grower to enter in. And then this is also where you set the threshold for nitrogen alerts. So we'll add in a test grower here. And then once you have a user added, you can set up a user account for that grower, and that's just a username and login and a password for them. And then you can assign whether you want them to get email or text alerts, and then when those alerts start and end, as well as which days those alerts will come in. These grower accounts also don't have a view only option. So if you give a guy access, he can go in and change his field configurations, but you can select whether he has the ability to activate in billable or just training mode. So once that grower is added in, you have the ability to add in a field for that grower. We'll back up first here. Another thing that you want to look at here is integrations within Adapt-In. So if you have a John Deere Operations Center, you can share information with machines and growers' machines through there. And what you'll have to do is just go in there and authenticate with that My John Deere account. It'll take you to the My John Deere page, and then it's just the username and password for that, and then you can follow the steps within that once you get going. We also have, if you're set up, our Agrion users, if you want to sync those up, or AgX, you can do the same thing within the AgX or Agrion settings. The last thing within here, if you have a custom fertilizer that you guys use pretty frequently, you can set that up within the custom fertilizers page. Just naming it, and then the general NPK analysis of that custom fertilizer. And then we'll want to know what standard fertilizer it's kind of most like, just kind of for modeling purposes, and then whether that's a dry or liquid fertilizer. The last thing within settings is the recommendation parameters. So as commodities change, you can change the price per bushel of grain, the cost per pound of nitrogen, and then how many pounds of N is expected per bushel of yield within this screen. So once you've got your grower added in there, you're ready to start bringing in fields for that grower. And we have 3 options for that. If you've got shapefile boundaries for that grower, it's as simple as dragging and dropping that shapefile within this circle here. We can also sync with outside sources, so you can bring that in from SST if you'd like, and it'll match that field up with the grower within Adapt-In. The last option is just using common land units to either draw on the map or select the common land unit and change the boundary as needed. Within here, you can name the farm and field, and then select whether which field mode you'd like, which Matt discussed earlier. We have 3 options: point-based, zone-based, and grid-based. And then any sort of zones that you might have, you can set that up as well. From there, you're ready to start configuring a field once you have it imported, and I'm going to turn it over to Matt for the field configuration part.
Okay, I'm gonna excuse me. I'm gonna grab a field that I've already got pretty much set up in the system. So once you've created your grower accounts and everything, you can go to land and choose the particular grower that you want to start working with in particular. This particular grower, I've got a few fields in here. So like Christian mentioned, different ways to bring boundaries in. This particular boundary came through AgX through a sharing option they have. But I'll go right into the configuration piece. For quite a few of you, this is going to be just a refresher. But we do have a couple pieces in here that are new. But I'll go through pretty quickly through the configuration categories, letting you know which ones we feel are very important for nitrogen recommendation accuracy, as well as just explaining each one, how they work, the options, and all that good stuff. And then this would be a really great time while we're in this area, if there are questions, comments, concerns, anything like that. While we're in this page, we can answer those as we go. So starting at the top with soil type, essentially you can see that this field is already configured. This is something that should occur within your account automatically. We're going to pull in the soil texture information from the Sergo soil database to populate this category. Essentially, this can be completed by clicking sync with a source and hitting the submit button. You can see that it's going to give you an update that it was successful and that 100% of the area was covered. In the case that there's a lacking of information, from Surgo, or you have a void where it's not 100% configured, that's where you would go in and choose the particular texture for that area of the field and whether or not it's well drained. If you have questions, please reach out to us through support, and we'll help you get that resolved. But very only a handful of times a year does that happen. Soil slope, again, is going to come from additional attribute information from that Surgo soils database. Again, if it's not already populated, sync with the source and submit, and it's going to give you the information such as I have here for the slope. For both of these categories, if you have information that you would rather use instead of Surgo, you have the ability to upload a shapefile. Obviously, you will need the particular attributes that we're looking for. So if you're going to be working with third-party data or data that you've created, let us know, and we can help you get that into our system very efficiently. The first category for utilizing spatial data will be soil organic matter. For this particular demo purpose, I have some grid sampled information pulled into the system here. You can see it's spatially represented. So whether that's coming from a partner platform like the ones Christian had previously mentioned, the AgX, the Agrians. Not sure that this data would exist in John Deere, but that information can come to us via sync with a source. Can also come to us via uploading a zipped up shapefile to fulfill this category. And then if you don't have spatial data, you can complete this by entering a constant value. Previous crop is a manual designation. Essentially, you're going to choose the previous crop from the drop-down list and submit that to fulfill this category. Expected harvest population. This is where a lot of our users are starting to incorporate their variable rate seeding prescriptions or as planted information to fulfill this particular category. Again, that spatial information can come with us via shapefile or by syncing with the source. And then if you have a grower that is just flat rate seeding, that information can be pulled into the system via constant value here to fulfill the requirements. Expected yield. This is an area that customers get very creative. As you can see, again, we can upload a shapefile. We can sync with the source. If you have zones in another software, whether those zones were created from normalized yield or through imagery or Virus or electrical conductivity zones, regardless of how you're creating this particular layer, if you can get it in a partner platform or get it into a shapefile format, that's going to be your best bet to get it into our system and populate this particular category. Obviously, if the spatial data does not exist to create this particular layer, you can bring that in as just a whole field flat rate yield goal. Something that is fairly new within the last growing season or so here is the ability to, on the fly in season, make an adjustment, whether that be by percentage or by a fixed amount of bushels. Make an adjustment, run different scenarios or simulations. If you're things are having a really good year and you think the yield is the achievable yield out there is much greater than your original yield goals, you can make adjustments without modifying your file and re-importing. So that's a great addition here the last growing season that I wanted to make sure everyone was aware of moving forward. Tillage method is pretty self-explanatory for the most part. You're going to choose the particular tillage designation that best fits what this particular field has experienced for tillage or will experience for tillage. Depending on what you choose and what that grower is doing out there, it may ask you for different information to be fulfilled within this category. So you can see there's a couple categories that are grayed out. This conservation tillage is essentially looking for the amount of residue that's left on top of the soil surface when it's ready to seed. Nitrogen applications. I guess let me close this real quick. So down through tillage method, these are all the categories that are required for us to run a nitrogen recommendation on your field. So something must be configured in each one of these categories, whether it's just a simple flat rate constant value, or whether you're configuring it using shape files, if that option is available. Everything down through tillage 100% has to be configured before recommendations will run properly. Now, as we get down through nitrogen and below, these are things that if the grower has nitrogen or some of these apply, the more fine-tuned you can get, the better the recommendation you're going to see from our system. So with nitrogen applications, if the grower already has nitrogen on the field when you're working through this field configuration, again, you can bring that in through a shapefile. You can enter that through a constant value as well. For those that have been all the way through the process and have exported a recommendation that they want to apply to the configuration, you can go into the system here and you can choose an application or a recommendation that was exported. If it actually went to the field and was applied, you can choose that particular application. You can see I simulated an application of 32% UAN. I can fill out the rest of these categories, hit select and submit, and it's going to apply that application at those associated rates to your configuration for you. No more exporting and re-importing that configuration layer. For those, a new feature for the tool this year is within the constant value portion here. So for those folks that are bringing in machine data that may not have pounds of nitrogen associated with the attribute table, we now can bring in that shapefile data from that machine or from that GIS software, and the user does not have to take that extra time to build that pounds of N column for AdaptN. You can bring that in, associate that with pounds of product, and we're going to make that calculation for you based on either your custom fertilizer creation or our standard fertilizer options. We're going to make those calculations for you. So much more streamlined this growing season as it relates to bringing in nitrogen applications. Just real quickly going through the different options for this configuration category. You're going to want to designate the timing of that application. You're going to want to designate the specific product that was applied during that time. I personally here in my demo account don't have any custom fertilizers set up, but as you can see, we've made some adjustments on our fertilizer lists here. So you will see this standard products list every time you come in here, but also if you have custom fertilizers associated with your account, those will show up here as well to be utilized throughout, from start to finish through the tool. One thing that I will show as well as it relates to nitrogen, this screen has changed a little bit. Obviously, we've got nitrogen rate and product rate, so you can view this and ensure that the right calculations were made. You can match that up with your load sheets, your spread reports to ensure accuracy. Options here on the right-hand side, actions you can take. If this is incorrect, if something is not right, you can remove this application as a whole. You can now edit. So if you want to change, if you had it pre-populated, you can change the date. You can change a couple different things there as it relates to that application. Now we can also view. So if I had multiple applications in here, if I had a variable rate fallen hydrous, I had a variable rate MAP or DAP, and then maybe a little bit of starter, I can view those applications individually to see the spatial variability. Again, to verify that the information that was pulled into the system is the right, you use the right layer, it's representing it spatially the way that I envisioned it representing it. So lots of options here as we continue to move through different growing seasons in the nitrogen application category. Manure is the next optional category. So for those folks that are utilizing manure as a nitrogen source, really looking for some very specific information in this category. We don't want to designate yes or no, was manure used on this field. We want to model this as a nutrient source. So the application date, the incorporation method, whether it was left on the soil surface or the timeliness of the incorporation needs to be entered, as well as whether it was gallons, was it liquid, or was it tons, was it a solid product that was applied, and how much. And then on the right hand side here, we're looking for very specific information from the lab analysis of that manure. We're looking for ammonium nitrogen, organic nitrogen, and percent solids. If your lab analysis does not contain this information, we would work with you to determine what source you would want to use and help you determine industry reference information that would help us give you the right numbers to put in there for a generic manure application. Irrigation, for those of you that are utilizing irrigation, different geographies throughout our trade territory, very, very generic at this time. We're going to simulate inches of rainfall, and we want to know which date, the date in which that occurred. New last season was also the ability to upload that information as a shapefile if that data exists as well, to help pull this information into the system. Cover crops was released late last spring, I believe. For those folks that have growers that are utilizing cover crops, we're looking for what type of cover crop was out there, the stage at termination, how big did that get, the termination date, what was the stand when that particular crop was terminated, and then the incorporation of that moving forward. So if you're working with growers that are utilizing cover crops, it's a great way to help them understand what that's doing as far as their nitrogen scenario goes. Rooting depth is a very important category to understand, not necessarily one to configure unless you really disagree with what we're representing. But this is a particular category. The information from this is coming from the information we're sourcing from the Surgo Soils database. And anytime a user would check in with us and have a question about whether a nitrogen recommendation is too low or too high, as we work through the configuration with that user and understand what's going on out there, this is a category that we would want to make sure that the user agrees with. So most of the time, what we're seeing is the user is utilizing the adapt-in defaults. But if for some reason it was a really wet spring and the roots were not able to penetrate as deep as what they normally would, you would make a modification if there's if there's a hard pan, if there's compaction issues, a lot of different reasons why a user may want to make modifications to this category. But we just want to make sure that everyone knows how important this particular category is, but at the same time, use caution when making changes to this particular category, and make those decisions very wisely, I guess, is what I would recommend. So you can see here, you can set a whole field rooting depth. You can run the defaults shallower. You can run them deeper. Very, very user-friendly modifications can be made to rooting depth if the user feels it necessary to do so. Emergence date is a very simple way to keep us calibrated as far as the growing degree days go and growth stage. There are certain cases where we see adapt-in off by a leaf stage, and some users want to snap that back into line, and emergence date is a very great way to do that if a user wants to utilize that as well. Soil nitrate test. Some of you are using this that are on the call. So if you are either pulling a late spring nitrate sample and sending it to the lab, or whether you are using an in-field scanning type machine, essentially we're looking for the date in which you took that soil test, the depth in which you sampled, and then just what was the result of that test entered into here. If you do have multiple samples taken and they're georeferenced, you can utilize the shapefile upload and bring that information into the tool as well. And then being able to adjust, if you want to make adjustments, you can make adjustments on that data as well. I will say we've got a lot of positive feedback about our simulated nitrate option of the recommendation that Christian will go through here in a minute. A lot of customers telling us that their soil samples are very, very close to what we're simulating. So, but if you do have samples and you do want to make changes, we obviously do give the user the ability to do so. The last optional category here is soil pH. This would be utilized exactly the same way that soil organic matter is, bringing that in as a shapefile, syncing with the source, pulling that from one of our partner software platforms, or entering that as a constant value if spatial data does not exist. So that's a fairly quick but thorough rundown of the configuration. So now we'll jump into, I'll pass it back to Christian, and we'll jump into the field activation portion.
Okay, so once you've got the field configured, before you can get a recommendation, the field has to be activated. And we have two activation modes. The first is training mode, and that's basically a historical recommendation. So if I activated this in training mode right now, I would be able to see a recommendation for 2018. And with that, there is no exportable prescription, and it is not billable. The second activation is just a regular activation, and that's a live activation. So if I activate this field now, it would be, I could see how much nitrogen it's calling for today, March 5th, 2019, and that is billable. And obviously there would be a prescription that you can export with that. We also have the ability to partially activate fields. So if you had a customer that had a 160-acre field and he decided that half the field was going to be corn and half was going to be soybeans this year, you could come in and select a portion of that field to be activated for that growing season. You can clean up that edge by holding shift and then clicking individual cells within that grid as well. That portion is only available for regular activations. You can't partially activate a field in training mode. And as the season goes on, say you partially activate a field and the grower decides that he's going to go ahead and plant the whole field to corn, you can come in and reactivate the rest of that field as well. So I'm going to go ahead and activate this field live. And once you've activated it, you have the ability to view a field recommendation for that field. So as you can see, for March 5th, 2019, this is what this field is calling for. A minimum of 0 pounds. There's quite a bit of this field that doesn't want any nitrogen yet. An average of 12 and a maximum of 50 for just a little over 1,700 pounds of nitrogen. Down below, you can see some statistics on mineralization and loss and uptake if we had a active growing crop. The virtual PSNT on this field so far, as well as some water information, and then growth stage. Again, if there was a crop in the field, you would see that information. Below that, we have some more configuration information. You can get a rundown of organic matter, harvest population, yield goal, and then pH, and then any sort of applications that you've made, nitrogen, manure, or irrigation, and then you have the ability to edit any of that stuff by clicking on the pencil there. Diving in a little deeper, within the map, you can click any of these cells and it'll tell you how much that cell is calling for. So 25 pounds in that cell. And then we can view some more details on that particular point in the field.
We've got particular categories that we associate with the nitrogen status, as well as the soil water status. So obviously we're not in season. We don't have any crop growing now. We don't have much activity going on in this particular field, other than the fact that this field is in northwest Iowa, and it's probably got 2 foot of snow on it right now, and it's very, very saturated. Extremely cold here where we're at. So I mentioned the graphs. I'll click on this. So the interactive graphs, we can go through and use your mouse to hover over particular rainfall events. You can see how much rain we are designating for a particular field boundary. I talked through the nitrogen loss breakdown, the differentiating between leaching and gaseous type losses. A big one that I know gets used a lot is the mineralization, temperature, really being able to understand, when is that ground frozen, when is it not, am I subjected to losing nitrogen at a particular time of the year or not. The next two, the nitrogen availability and uptake, we've got no uptake since there is no crop. Same thing with crop growth and uptake. Nothing essentially going on here since we're not in season, but great tools to utilize in season to help kind of keep track of things on your end as an agronomist. The next piece is going to be the export. So being able to, we've pulled our information into the system. We've activated our field, configuration's complete. Obviously, if we're ready to go, we're in season, ready to make those applications. we can make that export at this time. So for me, I don't have many other platforms associated with my demo account. So I would most likely export this out as a shapefile. If you did have a John Deere Operations Center integration, you would be able to send that recommendation back through, like Christian mentioned earlier, back to that grower or back to your machine if the technology exists for that to occur. That's fully functional and works very, very well. You may want to rename. We follow the standard grower farm field structure, but if you want to rename that to something more abbreviated, we allow the user to do that as well. I'm going to grab just a 32% UAN application. I'm going to round that to the nearest pound. And then I can make modifications to my export as well. So I've got a lot of areas of the field that aren't requiring or aren't asking for any nitrogen. So I could set, if I wasn't comfortable with that as an agronomist, or my grower wasn't comfortable, I could make a modification and set that to 25 pounds, and it would show you an adjusted recommendation above as well as the original. Essentially, same thing as it goes on the high end. If this particular rec was calling for 150 pounds, and you or as the agronomist or the grower didn't feel comfortable putting out that much nitrogen, or you were going out additional times during the season, you could make a modification there to set that maximum at a lower level. And then, for those that, again, have the ability to make multiple applications in season, you can make adjustments by a percentage or adjustments by a fixed amount. So, if I was going to the field at normal traditional side dressing time, V4 to V6, give or take, I could apply 60%, or so of this recommendation at that time, let some more, of that early season weather kind of mellow out, and let Adapt N kind of follow that along and make another application, a final push, if you will. During that late vegetative stages, you'd be able to then come in and apply the rest of that nitrogen in those areas that potentially would still need a little bit of a bump. In addition, you can adjust individual rates. So if you can see, I've got a lot of different rates out here. I've modified some of those. But if I wanted to make any modifications to a specific rate, I could do so in this area here. And then something else that's fairly new is being able to modify shapefile columns in the table. So there is at sometimes some confusion with applicators on what column they need to be using. So you can choose to exclude, pounds of nitrogen in the export, if you will, and just allow them to choose that product rate out there in the field. So a lot of flexibility here to set things up the way that you feel, or that you and the grower want to make those configurations when you're going to the field via the export. I want to back out here. Something that's new for this year is this create multi-year analysis report. So this particular feature is going to behave much like an Insight would, but it's going to very specifically use the configuration that you have built for a particular field. So what the user would do is select a simulation date. So if I wanted to choose, June 1st or June 10th, let's say, of 2018, then I can go in and select the growing seasons that I want to see a report on, and it's going to allow me to run this multi-year report based on the configuration below that we have built for this particular scenario. This takes a little bit of time to run because we are running a full analysis on each and every growing season that the user has chosen here. But I think I have one in my account. I sure do. So I'll open this up here and talk through this. So this is my multi-year comparison for June 10th on a field that I've got in my demo account here. So you can see what it's calling for nitrogen on 2018, the simulation date that I chose, the growing season that I chose. But then you can scroll down in the table and you can see all the years. So I ran this for every single year that I had the ability to run that from. So what I'm seeing here is, the growing season. It gives me the ability to click on this link for the field recommendation and go right to that recommendation to evaluate it. But it's given me a lot of my summary information here to help understand what's going on. So it's giving me the summary of the nitrogen recommendation, the min max average. It's also giving me the min max average of nitrogen loss and nitrogen mineralization as well. And then finally, the ability to evaluate the rainfall since planting and rainfall since we start our simulations on November 1st of the previous calendar year. So you can start to pick out the years that this particular field has experienced significant rainfall. You can also see the difference by a percentage from 2018. So 2017 was a 3% difference. 2016, 101% difference. You can see the rainfall differences here. 2016, 23.5 inches of rain since November 1st. 2015, 10.7 inches. You can start to pick out the years where you would expect to see more of a nitrogen need. And this is truly run on the configuration that I have in my demo account, which is in your all's case as a user built on the growers' real world live data that they're using on their farms to make their decisions. So this is a very, very powerful tool for you as agronomists to be able to utilize with your growers to help educate them on what Adaptan would have called for under these particular growing conditions in this particular growing season with the configuration that you have. Again, this is not something that's going to run as quickly as when you activate a field and hit the go button, as many of you do in season. This is going to take some time. It's gonna pull some bandwidth to run these 10-year type scenarios if you're running those. Best recommendation is to just run it and let it go. And from there you can come back to it and evaluate it. They're always going to pop up. If I click on the logo here above my name, I can see any recommendations, any notifications that I have. I can see my exports, and below that, all the way at the bottom here, I can see my multi-year field recommendations. I do believe that this has been very recently turned on for all accounts. If for some reason you go in to your recommendation screen and you're not seeing that particular link, please let us know, and we can help get that set up on your account. And you're going to see that here on the field recommendation. Should be this top link of create multi-year analysis. I guess from what I've got, that's pretty much it. I know we've run over a little bit on time, but if there's any questions, I'll turn it over to Greg if there's any questions. Otherwise, we'll probably go ahead and and end the broadcast and handle things afterwards one-on-one.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Christian. There were a bunch of great questions in the Q&A panel. Some of them I answered publicly, so you should all be able to click Q&A and go ahead and read my answers as well as the questions if they're of interest to you. There were a couple questions for which I needed a little bit more information, or it was something that was particular to your account setup. There are a lot of different permissions we can turn on and off, so I don't want to give an incorrect answer without being able to look at the details. So if you're one of those people, you can send us an email at support@agronomic.com, and we'll be happy to take a look at the particulars. When doing so, it's always great if you can send the grower farm field, or even a screenshot would be even better so we can see what you're seeing. But thanks for those of you who did ask questions, and we really appreciate you attending today. We also, just to mention, had some people contact us saying they couldn't make today's webinar. So if you know any of those folks, we'll be posting a recording of this once we can get it up and online, so anyone can come back and view it then. We'll keep the question panel open for a little bit if you have any follow-ups. Otherwise, thanks for joining us today, and hope you all have a great season.